right, so
meeting is being recorded.
let's make a
All right,
formal introduction
got it.
for our listeners. Good afternoon, Aret. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble, grateful that Aret Madilian accepted our invitation to the show. Aret, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello,
Aret,
Claudio.
as you know, the last 2 years with the COVID, the vaccine, people believe in the vaccine, some people don't. It had been, crazy times, if you're a touring musician, you couldn't tour. Millions of people died all over the world and so on and so forth. How have the COVID affected you, your family, your life as a musician? How are you holding up, your sanity?
Oh, the last part of the question is the best, the sanity. Well, an insane situation on many levels, I think. But living away from cities and the countryside hasn't affected me as directly as it has others who are actually living in more populated areas where going to work, coming home, going out, doing the simple stuff of everyday life was quite complicated. Whereas where I live, I'm away, I'm in the countryside in Normandy, on the coast of northwestern France.
Yep.
Life was basically the same as it is when I'm working on an album, because it's sort of, when we're doing an album, most of my time is spent in the studio, and when I take breaks, it's to go out to do something very simple and come back. So it didn't affect me directly in that sense. It affected us obviously on quite strongly, because a lot of the shows were canceled.
Yep.
Especially because we had just released our last album called Sentinel.
Yep.
And that came out in January 2020. And we were in the midst of a small tour we had already started in Belgium, Germany, Holland, and France. And when we came back for a break during the early part of the year, we were also preparing a small off show with the French actress Fanny Ardant. We were supposed to do a concert reading with her on, if I remember, it was the 27th of March in a theater in the city of Rouen in Normandy. And we were just a few days away from that show when the first lockdown happened. So basically that was the main effect on us. An important show that we were preparing with Fanny Ardant got canceled. Actually, it got delayed. We ended up doing it later on, but other than that, I think it was just an insane time on a mental level, because I thought that there was a lot of ugliness that showed its face, and of human nature. A lot of, I don't know how to explain it. It was a very confused moment. People were not being as honest with one another, afraid of one another, suspicious of one another.
Yeah.
And all that was quite disarming, because, you'd expect that we'd be a bit more mature about all this.
Yeah. People were, I think, I suppose, scared and very protective. They didn't want to get exposed, get sick, die. And I suppose
That's understandable. That part of it is completely understandable.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes the forms that it took and the fears started taking over common sense.
I got you. Yeah, understand. Let's go back to the beginning. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, how old were you when you perhaps began taking piano lesson or guitar lesson, or how music came to your life?
Actually, I didn't take any lessons. I'm self-taught on many of the instruments that I play. I'm not good at all of them. I'm better at some than others.
Yeah.
Well, when my parents migrated to Los Angeles, I was 13 years old.
Yeah.
migrated from Istanbul.
Yeah.
I come from an Armenian and Greek family.
Yeah.
And so when they migrated, I was 13. It was quite a culture shock because it was an extreme cultural difference, from Istanbul to Los Angeles. Basically, you are almost at extremes of West and East.
Correct.
And
yeah.
so it was a lot to take in at once as a young boy. But music came to me very quickly because I was already very passionate about music as a boy. I remember my mom used to, when we were in Istanbul, my mom used to buy 45, vinyls when I used to come home from school, and she used to hide them in the apartment where we used to live. And my job was to find what she hid somewhere in the apartment so I can find it. And I would spend the rest of the afternoon just, playing it on our record player.
Good for you.
I was sort of designated DJ of the house.
Yeah. And then you end up. Yeah. Go ahead.
So when we came to LA, when you love music as I did, everything was even just huger, bigger, because it was like the back end of the 70s, 1977, 76, 77. So there was still a very vibrant, back end of the 70s culture, the musical culture, very present in LA. The whole, surf culture, the music coming in from coast, and the radio stations playing all this music that I had, not been exposed to as much in Istanbul. And the first encounter, direct encounter, was very funny. It was one night when my parents were visiting my uncle. Actually, it's my father's first cousin, who was very passionate about music. He was probably in his late 20s at the time. He had bought one of those 2-level organs, like the Hammonds.
Yeah.
Do you remember them?
Yeah.
So, I remember after dinner, he had set up a studio type of area in a room where it was only piano and this organ, and he was playing it, and all the lights on it and all the buttons and all the interesting stuff really caught my attention, and I was just mesmerized just watching him play this thing. And apparently I was so mesmerized that when we got home, my father asked if I'd be interested in playing an instrument, and if and I said yes. So he bought the same organ to the house. And we had, so I started playing on my own, it became sort of my instrument, the 2-level organ with the pedal and all that. And I started experimenting with, mixing the different instruments on it, and just, that's how it started. It was the first time that I was really actually on an instrument. I was really playing an instrument. And then I started very quickly, instead of wanting to learn other songs, I don't know why, I just wanted to create stuff. So I created some music. Then I was recording on a cassette recorder. And then I met up by chance a girl who was the bass player of some punk band, who introduced me to a man named Spot. And Spot was the in-house sound engineer of the record label called SST Records. And SST Records was the home label for bands like Black Flag, Minutemen, Husker Du, and all those bands at the time. And Spot heard what I was doing. He was much older than I was. He must have been 35 or something at the time. And because he was always in this very heavy, hardcore punk scene, he said, I should record some of your stuff, which was totally different. It was more electronic. I really got into Kraftwerk, and I got into all the music we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And So it was more electronic, and plus I was on a keyboard, and I had bought a synthesizer by then. I was, between the ages of 13 and 18, I discovered a lot of electronic music. And one of the bands I used to really listen to at the time, and their first album was Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, OMD.
OMD, yeah.
And their first album, I think it was called Organization or something like that. And it had Enola Gay and Electricity in there on that album. And I remember getting, interested in synthesizers, Kraftwerk, and some other bands like Ultravox, early Ultravox, and Magazine, and all that. So I had some synthesizer experimentation, recordings, and he started, getting interested. So we recorded with Spot. He had a open session one evening. They call it the graveyard shift, between midnight to 8 in the morning. It's the cheaper time for recording.
Correct, yeah.
Was at the time. So he had a cancellation or something. So we ended up making a record together, a 12-inch 45. Wow. And it came out under the name of Vogue Sahara. And it got more attention than I thought it would get, because it was really just an experimentation. And so that's how I really started getting involved. And I put my first band together in LA called WOG, W-O-G, with a friend of mine who was also from Istanbul. And he was really into Joy Division, much more so than I was. So, and I was more into OMD. So we had this mix, a band that sounded like a mix of Joy Division and OMD influenced music. Yeah, so that's how it all started.
Yeah.
In LA in the early 80s.
And then how you end up, so what happened from Los Angeles to end up living in France? What happened there?
That's a vast question. I'll make it really short. It's just in 1988, I had enough of LA. Not because, I like LA in many aspects, but there's a lot of things I don't like about LA. The whole money culture, the 80s was very yuppie, the yuppie culture, which was very all money and shiny things. And it sort of wasn't my cup of tea. So I wanted to see other things. I wanted to see Europe. I had it back in my mind for years to go to Paris. Because I used to also, besides music, I used to be really interested in the movies from Europe. There was this channel in America, in LA, called Bravo Channel, and they used to show foreign films. So I used to be really interested in foreign films to see what was going. And I had listened to some music from Europe as well. Older stuff, French music and films by the French directors. So I guess I sort of fantasized about Paris like a lot of people do. And so in '88, I decided to go to Paris. I was 24. And then, things happen. You meet people, you meet a girl, you meet and I ended up staying. And it's sort of like a very long vacation. I've been here since 1988.
I hear you, man. Something happened to me similar too. I ended up chasing a girl and end up here in the States. Now I have all my life here in America. I'm a U.S. citizen and everything.
Exactly. We always forget those little elements that are absolutely determinant. They determine the whole life sometimes. So
yeah,
that's what happens.
How you end up meeting Beatrice and Gerard?
Beatrice and Gerard. My meeting with Gerard is very, very strange because when I was in Paris, I think it was early 90s, I got a phone call from Gerard, whom I didn't know at the time at all. He said he had found me on this machine they have in France. Which is called a Minitel. It's like kind of like it's like the ancestor of the internet. Yeah. A very, very basic. And he called me because we share the same last name.
Correct, yeah.
So and he wanted to meet me because of that. I mean, there was absolutely nothing musical about our phone call because we didn't know each other. And so I refused the first meeting because I didn't want to meet anyone at the time, and I was sort of in my own world, trying to, I was in my own world, and I refused it at the time, and I made some silly excuse of being busy or whatever, because I didn't know who this guy was.
Yeah, of course.
And a couple of years later, in '95, I think, he called me again. And this time I felt really bad and that I had already refused him. I said, this guy sounds pretty nice. I really should make an effort to meet him.
That's right.
And I did. And it was wonderful because we started talking about our names and how, because it's a rare name. It's not a common name, last name. So we're trying to, talk about, our past, our ancestors or what have you. And that my parents from the father's side come from the Black Sea, up above Anatolia, northern coast of what is presently Turkey, the Black Sea, and his parents as well were from, his father's side. So we assume that, we probably have links from our great grandparents. And, but quickly, when he asked me what I was doing, when I said music, the conversation stopped, and he said, "Oh, well, so do I. I'm also a musician." At the point, we just stopped talking about our families, our names, and we started talking about music. And then he said, "Would you like to see what I do?" And I remember walking in Paris, and I said, "Yeah." So we ended up going to his place, and it was like the cavern of Ali Baba. He had duduks and instruments from Armenia, from the Caucasian regions, and he started playing the duduk. It's a wind instrument. I don't know if you know it, but it's a
No.
it's a wind instrument that you find in that region, made out of an apricot tree, and it has this sound which is very close to the human voice, and it has a lament to it. It has a lament quality to it. And it's quite piercing as far as emotionally speaking, the sound of it. It's very, very deep and profound. So I was really drawn to it. I'd heard about the instrument, but I'd never seen somebody play it in front of me before. So at the time, I was still experimenting with a lot of music, but I was sort of on a hiatus, just not doing much, just hanging out in Europe, trying to figure out what I'm going to do, doing jobs here and there, working in a restaurant, working in a leather store. So I asked him to come out, and we started experimenting. So that's how I met Gerard. And in '97, I was invited to go back to Los Angeles with a small recording deal from a very independent small label who was interested in some of my piano compositions I was also doing on the side. That I was just, I wasn't really doing it to produce them, but I had done some stuff, and this guy I met listened to it, and he had a small label, and he wanted to record them. So I went back to LA for a couple of years, and when I came back to France, I didn't want to live in the city anymore, so I rented a house in the countryside. It was 10 times cheaper than living in the city, and I had much more space to be able to do music and actually start putting together a proper studio. And so Gerard was coming out from Paris to spend some time with me to experiment on recordings, which is when I met Beatrice. I met Beatrice because she was a friend of a friend who had come to spend a weekend at the house at the time, and she was quite musical, and she was singing with this friend of mine who was playing piano, and I really loved her voice. I got really attracted to her voice, and I asked her if she would be willing to try do some recording sessions on a few pieces I was working on, which became the first songs of Deleyaman, when the band was actually officially founded by me, Beatrice, and Gerard.
got you. And then how difficult was to put that record or yeah vinyl at the time or recording at the time together? It was difficult to put it together. It was difficult to finance it, or
You know, to be honest, what I at the time I had given up on all uh, anything that was musical industry ish.
really?
I wasn't really concerned to find a label. I wasn't worried about. I just wanted to do something which I really liked, and that's it. And so I was basically more concerned by the quality of the what we were doing than the financial part of things. At least when it all started, I was really concerned. I just wanted to do something because it was. I felt that this was my second chance, so to speak, of making music the main activity of my life, the main reason of my life. So I was really concerned that what we were doing was just good for ourselves, that kept us passionate about what we're doing. So I wasn't thinking any mercantile or any commercial, viability about it. But once we started, working on it, once it started taking shape, I did recognize that it had a sincere quality to it. It was sincere. It was coming from a place which was very sincere, which was what I liked most about it. I mean, there are a lot of imperfections in that first album that I could, you know, I could record over again. But what it did have that I can't take away from is the sincerity. And once it was sincere, then you're not afraid. When you're doing something sincerely, you're not afraid to
Yeah,
share it with the world. And
exactly.
it really doesn't matter what happens to it. It's just there, it's sincere, and it's there for whoever wants to take it
Yeah,
or listen to it, which is what we did. We went all the way with the recordings. I mean, I was really serious about the recordings, though. I mean, I wasn't doing this as a hobby. I was really doing this, very, very seriously. And I met at the time a man who had a small label in Paris, specialized mostly on the world music.
yeah,
And he listened to it. It was a cassette. He listened to it and he liked it very much. And he said that he would like to, release it on his label. And that was Editions Nech, it was called. It was a man named, we're still good friends with Patrick. His name is Patrick. And so he, and thanks to him, we were able to now finish the work and have them become CDs. And he's the one who actually, so we signed to his label, which is a very small label. And so we produced the 3 following albums with Patrick on Editions Nech. And he's the one who actually, gave us more visibility because he, even though the labels at the time were sort of dying out, independent labels, the smaller ones were able to sustain for some time. So that's when we got some attention from the French avant-garde Gothic scene. There were magazines like Elegy for the French, D-Side. There were some webzines like Guts of Darkness, Indie Pop Rock, and some obscure. They're still continuing, by the way, some of them. So, we got some attention I wasn't expecting at all, because we're really doing it for ourselves, to be honest.
yeah. I mean, it's beautiful that people take the chance and do the stuff that they like. Not many people do that. I mean, people are afraid. Like in my case, right? I'm a computer scientist. I I have my day job. I do well, and but but music is my passion. So during the pandemic, I opened one radio. I sent the link to the friends, to my friend. They like it. Then I open another one. Then I open another one, and I thought in whatever it was, March or April 2020, I thought, well, all these musicians are not touring. There's COVID. They might be at home. Maybe they are bored. So I started sending emails to people. Nobody
Yeah.
would ping me back, and then eventually I got a hold of Steve Hackett from Genesis, and that was my first interview. And then,
Incredible.
uh,
That's a hell of a first interview.
oh yeah, and I got lucky with that one. And then I interviewed another person from Genesis, and little by little, I learned the process. I wasn't sure at the beginning. The first thing interview probably what to ask, how you conduct, and I found a niche, and I thought, man, I really like this stuff. I want to create like
Yeah.
a way to start uploading stuff to YouTube, prefer the radio and the YouTube, and a way to an archive, musical archive, if you will, for future generation too, because my interviews are long. I talk with deeper stuff. I get to know the musician, right? They're different, and people like the stuff, and it went from there. And in the real world, I'm very shy, and now I'm calling people all over the world, man. So I don't know.
I think it's fantastic. I think it's really, well, I think all of us, we detect, we sense when something is being done with no reason other than, the love of what you do. And I think that maybe it sounds, as you get older, you get more comfortable with that as well.
Yeah,
I think at some point, to me, it was when we were 18, 19, I think you have too many gods, you're still trying to, trying to sound like someone or be like someone and it's all, it all kind of, you can sense that. As you get older, you sort of shed all that. And then you find yourself, and artistically, I think that's the most interesting moment, when you're just no longer interested in trying to, or necessarily look for recognition. That's not a good reason to do what you do. I think what's good, the only good reason to do what you do is just because you love it. And when you wake up in the morning, you want to listen to what you recorded the night before, because you just want to get to it again, and you just want to, create your own little world, and where you were really safe and secure.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta follow your passion and do it. I mean, I know that I have an accent, and I always say, man, who will get back to me? And I'm not a musician. I know a lot of music. I have a huge music collection. Music has always been part of my life. As I mentioned before, I listen every single day of my life, 2-3 hours of music every day. In the morning before I go to work, in the afternoon, at night. I buy a lot of music on a weekly basis, between record labels sending me stuff and CDs, vinyl, I don't know, 30, 40 a week. So I consume a lot of stuff. I see close to where I live, close to Washington, D.C., I see close to, I don't know, 40, 50 shows a year. Every band come this way, the big one, the smaller one. So I spend a lot of music. So I wasn't a musical, I wasn't a critic, I don't play any instrument, I don't know how to read music, but I knew a lot of music, and that's how it started for me. I thought, what the heck, I need to do it. I like music. Why not start calling people? And at the beginning it was hard, and then little by little, I moved up. I learned the process. I began pinging agents, using social media, and I'm close to the guy with all the big name. Eventually, right now, for example, people like Eric Clapton or Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin or the rest of Genesis, they are out of reach for me. But hey, I'm closing the gap, man. So I want to talk to all of them, because music
Why?
is.
Yeah, I think that once people sense sincerity, that
Yeah, of course.
reach is no longer, as difficult.
Yeah,
I
the
think
only
the
difficulty is here
toughest thing.
in your mind.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's really, there isn't much to say. Once something that's done by passion and sincerely, you know, it
Yeah,
seems to touch all of us.
right. And then so back to you, and so you put the 2 3 albums together. Were you able to tour a little bit, like small cafes, a small theater, and
Yeah, well, in the beginning, it was definitely a studio project because
yeah,
I didn't think in terms necessarily of having great musicians to get that sincerity we're talking about, and that particular specificness of each person, whether it be Gerard, Beatrice, because what was important was the album. But then Patrick from the label suggested that we do some live shows, which I was all for. But since we're not technically really good to reproduce what we're doing in studio on stage, and it was complicated because I was doing a lot of instruments on the studio albums, a lot of layering. I was doing a lot of the rhythm programming and all that. So, you know, I could only do so much on stage. I was doing a lot of sequencing. So we ended up finding a drummer who was in the village where I was living, a Swedish girl, Mia, who was a music teacher in the village where I was living in Normandy. And she had heard about me. I'd heard about her because we're the only foreigners living in the village. So I just went to her farm. She lived in a farm. And I knocked on her door with our first album in my hand. And I said, you know, we're looking for a drummer. I know you drum. If you're interested, give me a call. She called me the next day.
yeah,
So she said, I listened to the album last night. I love it. And I'm in. So we became four. So we had a Swedish woman. We had me from the States. We had Beatrice, who was living in Paris at the time. And we had Gerard, who's Armenian background, living in Paris at the time. So we actually started working really almost every weekend, and me every day on my end, trying to arrange the stuff for the stage so that I'd prepare things to work on for the weekends. And I remember going to Paris. I was trying to look for a place to play where we could play regularly, you know, sort of like a residency.
a residency.
And one day I remember it was a spring day. I walked off to some suburb in Paris because they told me there was this small tiny club, and I figured it won't be too difficult to get us a booking. So I found this place called the Menuiserie, which was a small 30-40 seater club, and they liked enough what we're doing where the guy who was running the place gave me his calendar and a pencil for me to pencil in all the dates I wanted for the year. so I took all the weekends. I took almost all the weekends, not all of them obviously, but almost all the weekends. And what I wanted to do is instead of doing concerts, because weren't good enough to call them concerts for me, I called them rehearsal concerts. So we would present the shows as rehearsal gigs. So anybody could come and sort of witness what we're doing on stage as a band, rehearsing, which would justify if we're not good, if we're making mistakes, you know.
Sure.
It's a rehearsal. It's not a real gig, which is how it started in my mind.
Yeah.
But of course, once you start getting dates and once you start getting people in front of you, you want to do it right anyway. So
Correct.
very quickly, the rehearsals became just normal gigs.
It will become normal gigs after that, you know, and
Yeah,
where you making enough money to at least pay for gas because you needed to, all of you were living outside Paris, so you need to go there
yeah.
every weekend, right? So
Yeah, well, with the exception of me, who had decided that I would be only doing music living in the countryside,
yeah,
away from the city, where my expenses were extremely low because, I mean, living in the countryside in France compared to the city, it's really much cheaper. So I was able to, sustain my financial situation just enough But the others, well, Gerard also. Gerard was also only doing music. Mia was continuing her lessons, giving. She had maybe 50 students that she was, teaching drums or piano to. She played piano as well. Beatrice was studying at the time to become a therapist, which she became. She's also a psychotherapist, Beatrice. So she was able to sustain with her side, main job, which was making the money for her. And yes, we're able to just get by, but we weren't making money, that's for sure. I mean, sometimes we're losing money. We're definitely not making much money, but we're not, we were able to sustain ourselves for the gas and all that. Because yes, I was driving. The shows would end up, from 8 o'clock to, let's say, we'd finish 30 or 11, whatever. Then we'd hang out at the place, drinks, dinner, what have you. And by the time we got back, we'd pack all the van. We'd get back at 2, 3 in the morning, back into the countryside. So yeah, there were good times. I mean, in retrospect, I love those times because it's that exciting moment where something is beginning, and you're doing it just for doing it. You don't know where it's going to go, but it takes very little for you to get excited about things. It takes the one good gig. It takes being satisfied of what you're doing, between what you've prepared and what you are presenting. Some coherence is happening. All of a sudden, a band is taking form. And yeah, there were exciting times, and then we ended up doing more gigs. Some people would hear about us. We did a place called Divan du Monde in Paris, which is an important venue, and we did a lot of venues in those first few years that just sort of happened. I don't even remember how they happened exactly, but some of them we were finding them. Some that contact us because of word of mouth, internet. The internet was also very, played an important role at the time. It was just coming into, everyone's lives. We got invited to Armenia to do a tour because of an internet meeting with a man who was apparently listening to our music and liked it enough, and invited us to tour Armenia in 2007.
Wow.
Which was a very, very exceptional thing for us to do at the time, because we were only about 7 years old as a band, and we were still, learning our craft. I've been doing music since the age of 18, but it's always a learning process. It never stops.
Yeah.
It
Then
never
how you
stops.
end up, and after that, I think you guys start beginning playing bigger venues more often. Instead of losing money, perhaps breaking even or making a little money, and you end up being touring here in the United States as well, right? We're talking about what, 2008,
Yes.
2009? Yeah.
Yeah, we toured in the States. Yes, it was quite, gradually, which is what I wanted. I didn't want anything too radical, because
Correct. Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that we're controlling our stage environment, and we don't kind of go over our heads. So I wanted it to be gradual, and it did work out that way. We went to the States for the first time in 2011 or 12, if I'm not mistaken. And we played it safe in that we went to the places that I knew, California mainly. So we did some gigs in LA, San Francisco. Then the following year we went out to Portland. Oakland we have some memorable gigs that we did in Oakland, and we go back to almost every time we go back to the States, we go by Oakland. We made some good friends there. And yeah, we did the States times, and we did some bigger venues. I think the biggest venue at the time was a place called Zipper Hole. It's in downtown LA. I think it's like a 450-seat venue, which was probably our first big venue at the time. And then we kept doing what we were doing making albums, recording, creating, composing, what have you. And we didn't really stop doing the small venues. I always liked doing the small venues. I still like doing the small venues. I think there's something really, really pleasurable. It's very pleasant, the smaller venues. And actually, I don't really think in terms of small or big venue. We just think in terms of, do we have something, to present? Do we want to do it? Do we want to travel? Is everybody, so we did a lot of gigs. We did the Santa Monica Playhouse in California, I remember, we did a couple of gigs there.
Yeah.
And it was, I met some great musicians during those times, because we shared the stage with some opening acts for us, and we became friends with some of the opening acts at the time. I met, you were talking about Pink Floyd, I met Stevie D, Di Stanislao, his name. He's the drummer of David Gilmour and Stevie D, and he was actually playing with a good friend of ours, Steve McCormick. And so I met incredible musicians like that on small stages, I mean, people don't realize that a lot of musicians who are passionate about what they do, they continue doing the small gigs. The drummer of David Gilmour was doing a small show in front of 50 people in LA just a few years ago, and he still does it.
Wow, good for you, man! Unbelievable, man. And then at the time you still were with the same record label, or another bigger record label took notice of you guys and said, well, these guys are getting somewhere, and they're signing up to.
Actually, we were with that label, with Patrick and Editions Nech for 3 albums. Then we signed, we were always with a small US label called TTO Records, who was basically backing us up from the very beginning, but they were acting more like a label who's licensing the releases to Europe, to other labels. So the second label we worked with in Europe was Equilibrium Music in Portugal, who TTO Records licensed the 4th and 5th album that were released by them. I think the 5th album, 4th Part 2, and then that was it with Equilibrium. We did 2 albums with them, and then we decided to just stick with TTO Records, because we were really happy with having complete artistic freedom to release the albums when we want to, freedom with the artwork of the albums, freedom with organizing our own tours. So we never really were labels, to be honest.
Yeah, that's important, because sometimes as you begin getting better and more noticeable in the world, you sign with a bigger record label, but there's more money, but more restrictions. You need to put an album a year. The artwork need to be like this. The song need to be like that. Need to be more pop or this, more electronic, so we can sell record. At the end of the day, a record label want to help you at the beginning, but they want to record an investment. So you need to take directions. And sometimes bands, they say, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do whatever we want, when we want. There's no pressure to do an album a year or whatever, and that's a trade-off, right? So,
well, I mean, experience, small experience in Los Angeles when I was 1985, 21, with our band WOG. There was a contest on a very famous Los Angeles radio station called K-Rock, KROQ. And they were doing a contest called Battle of the Bands in 1985. And they had announced it on the radio, and they were asking bands to send 3 demos. It had to be unsigned bands. And I ended up sending some of the recordings we had at the time with my band, with our duo that I was talking to you about earlier, WOG. And some months later, a friend calls me on the phone, says, "Hey, your music is on the radio, man." And I said, "Wow!" I was surprised. I thought it was just because there were 600 bands who had sent stuff, and I thought that it got lost within the piles of other music, and they weren't interested. Fair enough. They were playing one of the songs that I'd sent, and it was a calling and voting in system by the audience. So, to my surprise, it was 2 weeks before the end of the contest. We ended up becoming first place. So we won the contest, which meant that at the end of the contest, what were you winning? You were winning exposure, first of all, on the most important radio station of probably California at the time, Los Angeles for sure, K-Rock. But more importantly, it was a record deal with MCA Records at the time. And the way you were getting that record deal was the first 5 bands of the, they had a listing of top 10. Every week they would say who was, what position. And when the contest ended, we were number 1. And there were the 5 other bands with us, all 5 of us, the first 5, were to play live at the Universal Studios amphitheater in LA. So that when you play live, the record industry, the MCA record executives were there, and then they would vote again for who was the first place to give them the $25,000 5-year record deal.
Wow.
And before the contest, before the live show, the MCA executives came and we're all, doing the sound checks, and they gave me a contract like this thick. And I'm not exaggerating.
Really?
It was ridiculous. I mean, you're 21 years old, you don't have much experience at the time. And the danger at the time is also think that if I get a record contract, that's it. I've got it made. But it's not like that. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
Recording contract doesn't mean that's where it starts, but it doesn't mean that you have it made. And I couldn't sign it because I couldn't understand half the stuff, that they were talking about, all this, language that I wasn't used to, reading. And I just asked him if I could take it home and show it to someone who had more experience than I did. I was thinking of maybe calling a lawyer or something, or ask someone who's more, in the business world. And they didn't want to have me take it to the house and sign it later. They wanted it signed on the spot.
Of course, we don't know.
So I refused, and everybody around me was saying, "You're completely nuts. How can you refuse?" I said, "I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to sign something that I don't understand."
Of course.
So I refused, and we did the live show, and we ended up being voted, I think, second place or something like that. The first place band was a band called Pink Fence. I still remember it really well.
Yeah.
Pink Fence. So just to see if I was really silly not signing it, I followed for the years to come what happened. I never heard of the band Pink Fence after that night. And they supposedly got that contract. What I heard later was that what they did is that it was a 25, I don't remember the amount, but what they do is sometimes they get the artists and they don't necessarily release the work right away. So that band who got that contract that evening and who had something to propose to their fan base at the time didn't get their music produced for the next 5 years because they could sit on an album and not produce it right away. And you can't do any shows during that time without their approval. Yeah. You can't release any other music. What happens? So it's a tough call when you're young. Do you sign with a label when you're not sure what you're signing? Or I don't know. I just didn't sign it at the time, but we did get a lot of exposure because we were first place. They played a lot of the music a lot on the radio during that period, and then we released an album 3 years after that, which didn't do much because it wasn't produced right when that thing happened.
Yeah.
So, but we got some attention in Holland with a label called Semaphore, which is one of the reasons also why I came to Europe, because I was to meet some of the people there. So talking about labels, sorry, I made a little parenthesis there. I mean, there were some really good labels I loved that I would have loved to be on, like 4AD, I think was a really
Oh yeah, very famous. Yeah.
not only famous, but you could sense that there was some artistic freedom there because of the eclecticism of everything
Oh
that
yeah.
was on that label. And talking with Brendan, my friend from Dead Can Dance, I mean, he's I think he wasn't because of the same reason, because, well, at least I think that that label came across as something that you would want to be part of.
Yeah,
You know,
4AD, was Liz Fraser, Cocktail Twins, and people that have been associated with Dead Can Dance. Was a very well run. Ivo Watts, I think, is the last name on that.
yeah, I was trusting.
Yeah, it was very, it's very. They were very efficient, very good at what they do, and I have interviewed people that were part of associated with that record label, and they have a very good experience for what you're saying. So.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed. I mean, I don't know for a fact because I know it from afar, but the work that was coming out of there, it was so eclectic and so different from one another that
Yeah.
you could assume that artists had some freedom to be who they were and to be able to exist, uh, you know, as they would like to exist without having the pressure of being formatted. You know, that's the sense. That's the way I sensed it as a youngster when I was listening to the music coming out of that label. There were some other labels, but I don't. I mean, maybe. Well, I'm not sure about Factory. Factory Records was had really good stuff, but I'm not sure if Tony Wilson from Factory was as pleasant as a chap as maybe Ivo seems to have been.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So what happened? So what came next after you? You came back to Los Angeles, did a lot of shows in the United States, and you then.
Yeah, for Deleyaman, then we came. Then we. My main. What I really love doing is creating. The creative process of making albums, I really love. So there's always the same. I'm always going through the same sort of rituals. Immediately trying to return back to the studio so we can do another album. So I love doing that. So every time we do concerts and tours, whatever, I'm always quickly coming back to the studio to keep doing albums. So we could continue doing that. We've made 9 albums, well, 8. I'm working on the 9th right now, which will be released next year. So and it takes time, I like to take the time to live with the albums for a long while before they're released. So usually, as soon as we stop doing concerts or tours, I return to the studio with Beatrice and Gerard. They would come. I would give them some sort of framework in which we're always working together. And it's really a sort of a ritual, every year, every other year.
Yeah, how feel free to mention how you end up, being working with Brendan Gerard. I think the album was The Lover, The Stars, and The Citadel. We're talking 2015, right?
Yeah, you're right. Recollection is we met with Brendan in 2015.
Yeah.
I think he had just moved to France. And he very kindly invited me to his place, and we got along immediately. And he's a good friend. So we were naturally sharing, our stories and talking about music. And since we saw each other once in a while from 2015 on, I think it was 2016 when he was at our place, and we were listening to what was to become The Lover, The Stars, and The Citadel at its demo stages. And he had some good ideas for a few of the tracks, and we ended up working together. Well, he actually put on some rhythm programming on one of the tracks, And then I think I went up to his place and recorded some strings on one of the pieces. Yes, Escape, the song Escape, because he had really nice string sounds that I didn't have. And he's very generous, Brendan. So he really, he always offers if I wanted to use some of his sounds that I'm welcome to do so. So he was really cool about that. And yeah, it's hard to talk about it because it's really natural. There was no. It's just a friendship.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah.
It's just a friendship, and it's when things are natural, things happen naturally, and they sound good.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
that's great that you guys can, as musicians, help one another and so forth. And then
Well, I don't
you,
know if I've been much help to him, but he's been, uh, he was, he was very kind, and he was, he introduced me to Jules as well.
yeah. Then you
Jules
end up
Maxwell,
working with Jules and touring in the UK and
Ireland.
Ireland, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Jules was an interesting meeting too because Brendan uh, invited me one night to go over to Jules' place, who was also living in France at the time,
Yeah.
and he had a place called Le Relais, which was right across from a train station in a small village on the coast here. And Brendan came over, and we went together to watch Jules play that in his place that he used to put together shows every weekend, and he used to invite people from London, musicians that he knew. So I met him at one of his shows there, and we hit it off quickly as well, and went back to his place to play a gig as Deleyaman. And at the end of the gig, the next morning, we're having coffee. Jules had this idea of saying, "How about if we tour Ireland together?" So I said, "Okay,
Why not?
let's tour Ireland together." Yeah, it's and we did it, and it was great. We did it in 2018, and we went to almost 8 cities: Limerick, Galway, Lisdon, Varna, Dundalk, Dublin, Portaferry, Carlow, all these places. And we sometimes there were, little coffee houses. Sometimes there were art galleries. Sometimes there was a church. We played in a church.
Yeah.
And we even did a live show at the BBC Belfast while we were there. And so, yeah, we played with Jules. He also played with us on stage here in France. We did some shows where he was doing the keyboards, and he was on the keyboards and piano. And he also opened some shows for us. Actually, in Ireland, when we toured together, he was doing his own show. He was opening for us.
Yeah.
He had an album which was called Songs from the Cultural Backwater, which had come out at the time. So he was presenting that album as an opening act. And then he would stay on stage, and we would come on stage when he was playing his last song, and we'd sort of sneak on in while he's playing and transform the song that he was playing into a Deleyaman song.
Oh,
And then
wow.
we'd start our show. So it was,
That's beautiful, man.
yeah, experimenting stuff,
Yeah. And then I think a year after, in what, could have been 2019, I think Adet Can Dance ended up did a cover for
Oh,
one of
yeah.
your tracks, is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Brendan was on his solo tour
Yeah.
early 2019, where he had opted to play the more intimate venues, and he was all over Europe. And after one of the shows on his way back home, I think they all stopped by at our place, and he mentioned that what would I think if he was to cover Autumn Sun from the album The Lover, the Stars and the Citadel. And of course, I was very surprised, but I knew Brendan liked the song because he really, he liked that song from very early on when he had heard it.
Yeah.
In fact, that was a song on which he had done the rhythm programming, and of course, I was very happy, honored, and he was extremely respectful because he always kept me in the loop of the arrangement he was, preparing for the tour,
Yeah. Wow.
and he really kept the soul of the song as it is, and he arranged it so that it will be, it would make sense in their set list. And I was very happy. I mean, it's a not only is he a friend, but it's Dead Can Dance is a band that I have immense respect for. So it was very. It's. I still don't know how to describe that feeling when you're hearing a song you made in your studio all alone one day being covered in front of a large audience by a band like Dead Can Dance. It's quite. Uh, it's quite emotional.
Absolutely, man. Oh, unbelievable. I mean, I came across my Dead Can Dance by accident, of course, about I don't know, 10 years ago or something, 2012 or something. And I found the name very weird. And I began the first record I listened to Dead Can Dance. I felt very weird music. What kind of stuff is this, man? And I put it away. Say, I don't like because I was listening to more pop stuff, more rock and roll, like I don't know, Pink Floyd or Journey or Led Zeppelin, whatever. And I say, well, I want to give this album another try. And I
Which
listen.
album? Do you remember which album it was?
Um, I tell you right now, it was the first one. Give me 1 minute because I found it very weird. But let me. I tell you right now because I always get. Um,
The first one is just self-titled, I think.
um, I will remember the picture because they were like. Yeah, so it would have been the one from 1984.
Is
Uh, and
that
then
Serpent?
the Spleen and Ideal, right?
Oh, Split and Ideal. Okay, 1984.
Yeah, and then later on within the realm of Dying Sun. So
Right.
I
1980.
got to know them, as I say, those albums are 1984, right? So but my first one was 2010 around that time. And I found it very, very weird music. And the beginning, the first time I said I will give it a try. And then I put my headphones, would have been a CD or YouTube or Spotify, I don't remember. I said, man, this stuff is very good. Weird, but good. And and then it went from there. And then I saw them a couple times. I know they were very popular in Latin America. They did different gigs in Mexico and in Brazil and Chile and in Argentina and Chile. They really love their music. And so they went back to Chile a couple times. And I was, of course, I was I was living here in the United States, right? I came here to study in 1985. And through the internet, friends keep on sending, man, this band, they're from Australia and they're weird, but they're very good. And then I like a lot of electronic music as well, and it went from there. And then I said, man, these guys are very good.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
and then
yeah, I didn't. I found out about Dead Can Dance much later too. I was. Um, I think I knew some of the stuff without knowing that it was them actually.
yeah,
And then I think it was when I was in Europe. And yeah, so I mean, it was for me. It wasn't weird in that even when I first heard them, I thought what was interesting to me was the 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 mixture which was really successfully done between the Oriental or Middle Eastern or
yeah,
Eastern and Western without sounding pastiche. You know,
mm,
it was really well done. It was really well thought out. It was really
yeah,
tastefully, subtly elegantly done, and which is what I noticed. It was almost, I think that it was almost composed with a vision of almost like as though you're composing classical music, you know?
Yeah. And they were using very weird instrument, very different for like classic rock that I used to listen to a lot, or progressive rock. And weird sound and weird drums and weird instrument. And then when I discovered Lisa Gerard, and I said, man, what kind of language is she using? That's not English. That's something else. And then I listened to more stuff. Well, that's like she
Yeah,
using her own language, make up language and phonetics or what have you. She's using her voice to, create different sounds and words, and sometimes English, sometimes not, and
yeah,
uh, and then that's what I really began liking Dead Can Dance at the time. And then because Dead Can Dance wasn't touring every year, they will split up for 3 years, come back, split up for 3 years, do another album. In
yeah,
between, right? Lisa Gerard began working with a lot of movie directors, and then doing some film score, and working with other people, and and then at the same time Brendan began doing his solo work. He used to do with Jules and then with Astrid as well, and his solo stuff is very, very good.
mm,
And then because they were, I don't know, they were in hiatus for 3 years with the Condensed. Lisa did their own thing, Brendan did their own thing, and they came back together again, do another tour, and then they split up, do another tour. And the two of them were producing a lot of very good music, and that's what I came across. Plus Brendan is, as I say, never talked to Brendan, only to Lisa, and she's a fascinating guys. That if you
mm.
like that kind of music, if you first of all, if you produce that kind of music, you gotta be an interesting person. It's like listening to your stuff. You couldn't be a boring person by what the type of music you listen, you're producing. So,
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's hard to explain creation, isn't it? It's.
yeah,
I think back to what we were saying very early on. There's some beyond any other consideration, but you have to do what you have to do, and
absolutely. Yeah,
it's sort of like I kind of lately I've been comparing it to cooking.
yeah,
Even though even though you're just going to eat on your own, you're home alone, or only with your wife or with your companion, whatever.
yeah.
You're still going to you're going to want to make good food. It's not even though you don't have 10, 20, 30 people coming over, you still want to make food for yourself, right? So
Yeah.
I think that music is kind of like that. Even though nobody's going to listen,
In life, you gotta be a risk taker. In life, you need to do
when you're
what.
doing it, it has to please you. I mean, after all,
That's
I
right.
think every band is their first audience. I mean, as a
That's right.
band, you have to love what's coming out, and it's not pretentious. You really have to like what you're doing, to do, not only like in the sense that this is good, but it has to move you.
That's
If it
right. Yeah.
moves you, then you're doing something that that is sincere, because it's hard to be moved by your own work. It's really tough.
Yeah. 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 I'm a risk taker. By you know, I was born that way, and I will always be like that way here as an immigrant here in the United States. And you gotta. If you're a musician, you're an artist, you're a painter, whatever. You need to do what it pleases you, and hopefully people will like it as well. But you do it because you like it yourself, right? And
Yeah, I
uh,
mean,
and
you
then
need to
and
do it.
then
Yeah. Well, you need to do it. It's like you needed to have to sort of give yourself poetry in your own life.
yeah,
Give you,
and then you not only you do it by yourself, but sometimes you don't have a choice. You know what I mean? I
yeah,
mean, they start keep on calling you back. I mean, with as I say, the radios at the beginning, I always tell the same story. And during the pandemic, I began listening to my own music, and I create like a website instead of putting the CDs and switching it or the vinyl, whatever. I created an interface, uploaded my own music in a way to listen to my own stuff because I was working at home, and I thought, I like all these musicians. I have a lot of music, I better start calling people out. You know, I knew, yeah, I wasn't a musician. I don't play instrument. I don't know how to read music. I have an accent or whatever, but I know a lot of music, and I began calling people, and it's I didn't think twice. You know, why not?
Yeah,
I always ask
exactly.
myself the question, why not? If
Exactly.
that's made me happy, why not? People sometimes they're foolish. They live somebody else's life. They study a career because the parent told them, "Hey, you need to be a doctor. It's not doctor the family, or you need to do that, whatever." I don't want to live like that. My life like that. I One day I'm going to be a red 85 years old. Look back in my life. I said, "Man, I saw 5,000 shows. I talked to the best musicians in the world. I saw great gigs. I traveled. I took I have a couple beer with Eric Clapton or with, took a picture with Lisa Gerard or whatever. And I want to die happy. That's why you gotta live your life, man. You know?
Yeah, I always think there are two ways of looking at everything. Either nothing is important, there's nothing to be afraid about, or everything has to be done extremely importantly. Like, but in both ways, we're all passing through, right? We're all passing through. There's no need to be really, if possible. I mean, there are some people who have good reasons to have issues and fears, but when you can avoid it, and if you have the choice, there's really nothing to be afraid of. Really, just what's the
Yeah,
worst that can happen? You know,
yeah.
in your
I'm
case,
very
somebody's not going to give you a call. In our case, somebody's going to say, "I don't like their music." You know, what's the worst that's going to happen? It doesn't really. As
yeah,
long as you know what you're doing, as long as you are actually behind what you're doing, the
I'm
rest.
very passionate about with the interviews, with a new person. I study their life, I study the music, I listen to your stuff, they send me stuff. One day I end up meeting you and we share a beer or a meal or whatever. And that's beautiful. I never thought that I would go this by far. At the beginning I thought, well, if I do 10 interviews, that will be great. And now I have done over 200, go to 250. And I talked to one person this morning. I'm talking to two people tomorrow, then three during the week. Believe me, it's for me, this is like I think I'm dreaming, man, because I never, I never
No,
thought it
it's
would
wonderful.
be possible. But you
It
need
is.
to be
It's
a dreamer
wonderful.
in life, man.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Abbey project, Normandy. That's a masterpiece, man. That's a beautiful thing. Very different from the stuff you have done, but it's it's and plus the picture. As I say, I never been in Normandy. I always in Paris, at the outside of Paris, and I saw the pictures on the in your Facebook account. So man, this is beautiful. Who is this guy? And I began researching you, and then I went to Bandcamp. I look at your first name, last name, and I listened to the first thing I listened to was the Abbey project, and the music is unbelievable, man. Very good stuff, man.
Thank you. It happened unexpectedly. It wasn't something that was to happen. It wasn't planned. Um, we did it right at offset of COVID when things started opening up. I think it was 2021 June, last year in June. We were invited to do a concert at a manor house's garden. It's a very important place in Normandy. It's 13th century. I think it's one of the oldest manor houses in. They call it manoir in French. In France, it's called Manoir du Catel,
Yeah.
and the owners are from Paris, and they had heard about us, and the girl who takes care of our bookings, Isabel, had apparently arranged for a concert there. And they have a small open air theater, grass theater. And we did a concert there in June of last year. And there were about 100 people sitting on on grass and all that. So like an amphitheater. And a few months later, I got a phone call from Frederick, the owner of the manor house, and another woman who was in charge of all the abbeys in Normandy. And apparently they were at the concert, at the Deleyaman concert. And they liked the music very much. And they asked if I would be willing to compose a piece of music, which for them, it wasn't clear really. They didn't know, it wasn't clear if they wanted me to compose one piece of music, two, three. There were no length, duration really. They just asked if I would be willing to compose for a festival they were preparing, which was to take place in the Abbeys of Normandy. And it was a multicultural festival. And they wanted to have a main theme, which would be the music. And the funny thing is that the theme that they had chosen was silence. So they first asked me, is that something that's strange that we're asking you to compose music for a theme on silence? And I said, not at all, because I think that a lot of the music that I like is music that takes me towards silence. I think some music actually represents silence better than silence itself, So I said, no, it's not an issue at all for me. And I started thinking about the project. And of course, I needed to have some technical information, because these places are, difficult to compose music for, because they're all different from one another. Some of them are outdoor ruins. Some of them are huge indoor abbeys. Some of them are smaller chapel-like, sizes. And so I started working on the project by first going to a few of them, visiting some of the places, getting a feel for the architecture, and then I just started working, sort of having the images in front of me when I was working on my computer, and just to sort of make sure that what I'm doing was in phase with the architecture of the places. And eventually, I just started working on music like an album. And I sort of used my little experience I had when I worked with the actress Fanny Ardant in France, where she had read a piece of literature by a Swedish author to which I had composed music. And I sort of used that experience and treated it like an album that I would be making, an instrumental album I'd be making. But I had to always consider the fact that, these are going to be played within a specific architecture. And I had to take into consideration technical aspects. Other than that, I worked with the same musicians that I work in the band, in Deleyaman.
Yeah.
The next album that I'm working on, for example, all the musicians who recorded on the Abbey project are also I've recorded with them for the new Deleyaman album as well. So you were talking about taking risks earlier. Next Deleyaman album, I'm going to have sounds, instruments that I've never used before on Deleyaman. So that's going to be.
Yeah, that was that was good for you. Feel free to mention the website where people can find you, or Bandcamp, or buy your music, and feel free to mention all that.
Well, the Bandcamp, Deleyaman is a Bandcamp page. We have a website, and because the Abbey project is completely, it's under my name. It's not a Deleyaman album, but it is available on the Bandcamp page of Deleyaman, because I didn't want to create a specific page just for an one-off project. So it's under my name, but it's on the Bandcamp of Deleyaman, and it was released as an album. I mean, it ran during the festival for a week, which was from October 26th to November 1st. But we decided that the music, that it should exist on its own on an album. So an album was released just a few days ago, 15th of November, where you can find on any platform or what have you.
Yeah. Well, very good. It was very nice talking to you, Aret. Hopefully, I will meet you face to face in in France one day, and
Pleasure.
definitely when I get a copy of a couple albums, you can sign. We need to get together for dinner or beer or whatever.
Yeah, send me your address, and I'd be happy to send you the albums if you want me to
Thank you
send
very
them
much. I
to you by
appreciate it.
mail.
And you know, mention that to Brendan that I'm waiting for his phone call, and you know, definitely we need to go do something together one day, maybe with you and Brendan together. And I need to do an interview with Brendan first, and then we'll get together for dinner in France or somewhere in the world, man. All right. All right. It was very nice talking to
Okay.
you. Have a good afternoon, Aret, man.
You have a good afternoon too.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You too.
Claudio.
Thank you.